tour stop 1 is White Pine Plantation, and it's presented by Randy Cooper, retired DNR forester, and also one of our Tree Farm District chairs. The information covered in this tour stop will be replacing balsam fir with white pine, which is a bit more climate adapted here, and then talking about small mini plantations versus larger plantations, and then the site prep and density of planting, bud capping, weevil protection, and lots more.
Who's got white pine on their land? Who doesn't have white pine on their land? Everybody's got white pine on their land. Okay, well, we don't have to talk about who wants to get white pine. Well, I want more white pine on my land, but that's one of our objectives.
Let me ask you this question: why though? I mean, nobody wants white pine in the lumber yards right now.
Yeah, but 80 years from now, who knows?
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, you just about have to give away white pine.
Exactly, and where else would those bear cubs climb when they want to get away from predators?
But if you're looking at a production,
yeah, then I don't know. The Menominees have made white pine work economically.
The one thing I found out is that the old timers would always make their doors of their barns. They'd make the barn out of red pine and other material, tamarack, but the doors were white pine because white pine
lighter.
Doesn't bleed.
Oh, okay.
The knots don't bleed.
Okay.
So I didn't know that until an old timer told me that. But I thought that was interesting. And now I see more and more people using that for mantles or in big log homes across the entryway. Yeah. So maybe it will become a market.
Forget if it was who it was this morning that mentioned we were talking about pruning and whether it's economically feasible to do that, or whether it makes sense economically to do pruning for clear stem, and he used the example of if you're selling logs to Buer, you could have the knottiest log or the clearest log, and they pay you the same price. Mm-hmm. He said if you haul them to Pukal in Woodruff, which is not an economical thing from here probably, that they will pay a premium, I guess, for not clear, not free, or less knot type logs.
Because they're using it for flooring. That's.
There's a lot of stuff they can use it for. I don't know. I got stacks of it all over. My sheds are all full of wood. They're all full of wood. I got stacks outside. We've got one of our biggest white pine blew down in 2019, and the blowdown that we had, Ev knows about that. and it was probably from here to maybe halfway down the hill off the trail. My log landing is right here, so it was like that far away, and my tractor wouldn't pick up a 34-inch or whatever diameter it was, even an 8-footer, and I didn't want to cut it shorter than that. So it probably would have gotten left there, but we were doing a salvage harvest, so I was able to coax Dwayne to take the forwarder over there. He volunteered. He said, "You want me to pick that up for you?" Yeah, so he brought it over and set it on my log deck there. Just a couple cedar poles that it sits on, so I can roll it onto the arms of the portable sawmill. And so whether white pine makes sense economically, I don't care. Gary doesn't care, right? Well, maybe a little bit. But, we want to try and grow stuff that we can eventually maybe sell or be able to utilize it when it comes down,
or just enjoy the beauty of it.
And that it doesn't matter, then it doesn't matter, aesthetics. There's no charge for aesthetics. You can do all the, that's why I mow trails. Well, that's partly for access to get wood out, but for access to be able to get in and see things and find out that tree blew down back there, and so there's lots of stuff that we do that doesn't make sense economically to do it, but So the idea of pruning, you know, I don't know. In all my years as a forester, if somebody had a plantation, I would give them the handout that was either white pine or red pine, depending on what they had, and you know, say you could do pruning, and you could get cost sharing through NRCS to do it, or through DNR with the Wiffle Gap program, and maybe I don't think I ever had anybody apply for cost sharing to do pruning.
I did.
Probably a few. You did?
I did.
Well, see there, you know, so it's not something that every landowner is doing. I mean, who's doing pruning like this to create a clear stem? Ev, you guys did
Yeah, we
some of
did
that.
some, yes.
You guys did some of that. You maybe have done some. I don't have enough white pine that's, well, I don't know if you call it that clean.
But we did it on a red pine.
Okay.
In Europe, they have the tree monkeys or whatever. They just
Oh,
clamp
yeah.
on the bottom. They just go up and
There's all sorts of contraptions that. There's one that's it goes up by itself. I think.
yeah,
It's
that-
all,
Yeah, that's
that's
what those tree
that's the
monkeys
tree
do.
monkey.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Ross has got he's got kind of a neat pruner, and I forget if it's Finnish. I think it's Finnish, either Finnish or Swedish. And you know, my idea of a pole pruner is, you know, big fiberglass pole, and you're trying to get that limb off and make a proper pruning cut and all that. And well, this one, the leverage, as you pull down, you just pull on the handle, and part of the pulling down is the leverage of doing the cutting.
Yeah.
But you know, I think Ross did this. I think he did it all with just a pole saw, but I'm not absolutely sure. But I've done a little bit of pruning on some trees in the yard at the cabin, and boy, you want to hack through a limb like this on a white pine with a pole
Not
saw.
with a pole saw, no.
It's you know, besides the fact that it's, you know, 10 feet up there or 15 feet up there, and it's an awkward angle, and
And you're gonna have to cut through it twice because
well, yeah,
if you cut through it, you're gonna tear.
you're going to have a banana peel come
That's
down
right.
the whole tree.
Yeah. You're gonna have to do it twice.
or pinch your saw.
Well,
Well,
you know, everybody's a pinch of saw now
Yeah,
and then,
that's
you know. That's right. You remember, oh, I'm not supposed to do that. So the idea of pruning is, you know, I don't know, Ross, I think, enjoys it, otherwise he wouldn't do it. But his thinking is that this little patch of trees, and I forget what he said, 50 trees in this little patch, brings up another forestry dilemma for us, right? How do we do a harvest in there when the time comes? If you got a 20-acre plantation over here, yeah, they can drive the processor over and pick those 3 trees out, and forwarder can come and pick them up, and off you go. But if that's all you have to thin at the time, it's either you do it yourself or you pay somebody an awful lot of money to bring their equipment in or something, and most people don't work that hard to figure that out. I think in all my years with DNR, I think I had 1 or 2 people thin their own plantations, and so I actually saw a 3-acre plantation in Kenosha County, about as far south as you can get in the state, and he stacked the wood out along the drive, and he came with a truck and hauled it off to, I think it came to probably Philmany and Kaukauna at the time.
yeah,
So
I used to do that too, but now it's getting so hard to market it yourself. I mean, you know, to find someone that will, you know, has a contract that will take it.
Yeah. This is a little bit off track of the white pine, because we had some red pine salvage the year after our big blowdown. You know, 20 or 30 trees, you know, and what am I going to do about that? You know, I've cut a few trees myself, but I'm not a logger. And I called our portable sawmill guy who does small logging jobs, and I said, Ron, what would you do here? And he said, well, he says, you're doing fine. He says, you just keep, you know, he had told me over the phone, you know, fewer pays better for 10-foot. So I was bringing 10-foot bolts out, you know, three of them on the forks if they weren't too big, and you know, 2 on the forks if they were a little bigger, and or you know, and I had a pretty good stack. You know, it was about a 10 cords there, and I had another 10 up front, and well, the other story about Buer was they don't want any blue stain. Well, in the middle of summer, blue stain is like, it's coming on right now. And so, but we finally found somebody that would haul it to Buer. He had a contract with Buer, and we had some older logs that were in the pile. He says, "Oh," he says, "they'll take those. They're desperate for wood now." So he knew that they would take some that had a little bit of blue stain in them.
What our guy did is he waited for the railroad car and he put those in the bottom where the sides were.
Well, you know, there's always something that, you know, there's the portable sawmill route, but that, you know, that's got its drawbacks too.
Well, yeah, then you end up with a barn full
A
of
shed full of lumber.
yeah.
And shed full of lumber. Well, what are you going to do with all that? Well, you know,
And if you build something, then they tax you on it.
that's right. Yeah.
Kids are gonna
On a
push it
woodshed?
No, you build.
Oh, yeah, building,
You build
Yeah.
like another storage building, and now it's all of a
Yeah.
sudden they tax you on it. Yeah.
Yeah, well, let's talk about white pine again. Well, we are talking about white pine, but some of the silvicultural stuff here. So, what do you think of when you think of white pine? Good or bad?
A good tree. Yeah.
Yeah.
But I mean, good things or bad things. Name some. Or like drawbacks to white pine.
Marketing.
Well,
Can't
that,
sell it.
okay, that's one. Yeah,
White pine blister rust.
blister rust.
Evils.
White pine weevil, or affectionately known as tip weevil.
The sap, if you're going to park your car under it.
Well, that too. The reason behind the bud caps,
Yeah.
deer browse.
Mm-hmm.
So it's, you know, but we're not doing this. We're not doing this for the money. We're doing this because we like trees, and we want to leave our land better than we found it. And, so if you're starting out from either planting or volunteer trees, you know, this white pine was a volunteer seeded in, and Ross does bud capping. I don't know if he does it on every single one, but I think every one that he sees that he can walk to, he'll do bud caps, and that seems to have really helped. There's one over here that we did with the last group, the bud cap at the very top. He said that 6 feet is where he quits with doing the bud caps. You know, deer
And he just
like,
staples them. Is that what he-
just staples them. For that one, the larger ones, he uses a 4x6 sheet of paper, and then the smaller ones is a 3x5, and it's just regular copy paper. I was reading the other day that some people even use newspaper.
But
I don't-
Break down.
it's
you know,
only
you
gonna
want
last
that
a year.
breakdown,
then,
yeah, because we found some butt caps that Ross didn't get to, and you know, it looked mostly intact, and it had to be at least from last year, so it went through one winter, and that's really all you want, is to get through that winter so the deer isn't going to browse that terminal bud. They could browse everything else on that tree, but hopefully they won't kill it. But so that's one thing Ross does. In the case of blister rust, is everybody familiar with blister rust?
Unfortunately, yeah.
Yeah. I spent most of my career with DNR down in the southeast part of the state, and blister rust is pretty rare there, at least where I was. You get as far, you get into Sheboygan County, closer to the lake, well, yeah, then it's on the northern Kettle Moraine, it's pretty bad. But for the most part, tip weevils weren't an issue down there, generally speaking, and blister rust. So we grow some Christmas trees, and if I've seen tip weevil on white pine, it's been maybe 5 times in all the years we've been growing trees that I've noticed, and blister rust probably even less than that. So it's, you know, depending on where you are in the state, it's this part of the state north is big. I don't know if they still have the hazard maps for blister rust, you know, that I told the story with the last group about a forester, Alex Katovich. You heard that name?
It sounds familiar.
Steve's dad?
Oh,
You know
okay.
Steve? Well,
Okay.
Steve is a forest entomologist, but Alex Katovich, I looked it up the other day because I'd heard the story a few times and wanted to get it right. He worked for DNR and DNR's predecessor, Wisconsin Conservation Department, 1950 to 1986. And he worked in central Wisconsin, Waushara County, and that's kind of the heart of red pine. That's what, I don't know, when I was a young forester, that's what, that's all they talked about in those counties was red pine. And he made recommendations to his landowners that they plant 10% white pine in their red pine plantations. Well, now we can look back and think, well, that was a wise thing to do. In case something happens with the red pine, and white pine is a fast-growing tree, they'll outgrow red pine on a lot of sites. And so he did that. Well, apparently he got a written reprimand.
Oh, really? Okay.
Well, he's since been vindicated. Many years, it didn't. I don't think it was too many years before they realized that it was a good thing, because I've heard Buzz Varadian and Marcia, who have worked in that area, talk a lot about the white pine in the red pine stands, and I'm not sure how many pure white pine stands they've planted there, but probably less common than a mix. But
Yeah, ours was planted to red pine. They had like 8 rows of white pine on the north side, and the white pine have seeded in so well that we just did a harvest where we knocked the basal area of the red pine down pretty significantly to
Yeah.
release those white pines. So the white pine is the future of that
Yeah.
stand now. So.
That's kind of what we did with our red pine plantation. We had, I think it was 14 acres of the 20 acres blow down. On the west side, there's one row of red pine, and and then there was a little bit of a hill at the southeast corner. Well, I think that was enough to deflect the wind away, and so we got kind of a perimeter of our 60-year-old red pine yet. But the white pine had been seeding in from the edges for years. There was no white pine planted in there that I could see. It was originally planted at 5x5 spacing, and it had been thinned twice when we bought the property. And there were still, we were working with Donna Johnston, and she was a consulting forester. She and her husband Lee, they did our first timber sale in 2005, and all of a sudden the phone rings and Donna says they can't get through the rows, and I think, is that the one, did I mark it? I think I marked it, Well, I'm thinking they're going to go down the rows north to south. Well, that was my first mistake, because there were wider spaces between going crossways. And so they ended up doing some more marking of the other side of the trees so that the processor could go crossways. And in fact, this last thinning that we did just not long before the blowdown, I thought, well, we're good there. We got it wide enough that the processor can get through. Well, there were still places he couldn't get through. So at that point, we decided to take out every
Third row.
So there are 2 full rows in between, and these rows are, their rows are pretty widely spaced now. So we would have been good for thinning for years to come, but then it blew down. So
Okay.
so rule number 1 is don't get too attached to your trees, because I don't know how many.
That isn't going to happen.
I don't know how many woodland owner friends we have that have had the same story, and it's like, well, Thompson's just went through another one a year or 2 ago, and I'm sure maybe, I don't know, anybody else you've had blowdown?
Oh yeah, and I speak for every person that owns property and really involved with it, that you get to know every tree, and yeah, it hurts.
Yeah, yeah, especially if they're your biggest trees in
Yeah.
some cases, you know.
Mm-hmm.
So we talked a little bit about deer browse. We talked about bud caps. One of the other things that Ross does is he sprays that terminal, is it just a terminal bud? With an insecticide about the time that the weevils are hatching out. Is that it, Gary? When they're
Okay, I
hatching
guess
out?
I've never done that.
I've never done that either, but there was a fella in the last group that did some of that treatment. So that's tip weevil. Okay, couple things about tip weevil is that for many years it was like there was probably a manual code that DNR had that just about required, if you wanted to grow white pine, plant them in a partial shade until they're 17 feet tall and then take the overstory off, and if you want to have any chance of having any white pine. Well, the Menominees have kind of proven that that's not the only way to do it. There was a study that they did with some pretty large white pine. I don't know how many logs they did. Entire tree, they cut it right through the pith all the way from the butt log all the way to the top. And everywhere along that pith, they could see evidence of weevil damage and the kink. And let me see if I can find this one. Right up here, you might be able to see it from there, Gary. Let's see, 1, 2, 3, the fourth whirl up.
Oh yeah, okay.
There's just a little bit of a slight curve there. Well, that, and that's, let's see, from that point, 1, 2, in less than 10 years, that's pretty much straightened out. I mean, from here it looks pretty good, but by the time that tree's got this much more wood on it, I don't think you'll even be able to tell.
I think it depends on how heavy the weevil damage is. If it just happens occasionally, like there, and it's going to grow through it. But if it happens repeatedly and over, I mean, even in the same season where you're getting weevil damage on more than one of these laterals that are trying to take over,
sure, okay.
you end up with a big bush, is what you end up with.
It reminds me when I was still in training with DNR, we got invited to go mark white pine on the Menominee. Oh, this is going to be great! They got some huge trees there.
Mm-hmm.
They didn't let us anywhere near the really nice trees. It was a stand exactly like Gary described. Multiple stems, big, heavy, low limbs, and it was, and it. I think it had been a planting that survival wasn't that great, so there was a lot of open grown trees and weevil damage, and we were just marking the crummiest trees to take out in that. I'm thinking it was the first thinning, but they were pretty good sized trees, but it was because they were so timber wise, they were so ugly that that I think they didn't know what to do with it until that point when they had some quote free help to do some marking for them. But the Menominees are state of the art silviculture with white pine and anything else they grow there. They've done some real innovative stuff and for shelterwood harvests and that kind of thing. So okay, so we did deer damage, we did tip weevil, blister rust. Have we talked about basal pruning?
No, we haven't talked about that.
Okay, so blister rust, it's a rust disease just from the name of it. So think spores flying around everywhere, kind of like ragweed pollen this time of year, or if people have allergies, whatever you're allergic to is flying around. And so if we're looking at this patch of balsam here, at the top of that tree, if that's a white pine top, and blister rust spores land up there, there's much better air circulation, lower humidity up there than close to the ground in the heavy grass, and that's one of the recommendations if you have fungal diseases in whatever you're trying to grow. Mowing between your rows if you can. Well, this isn't practical out here because there's lots of volunteers, and so it's not practical there. I do it in my Christmas trees, but of course I do it for the Scotch pine that have a needle cast disease that that makes the trees unsaleable as a Christmas tree. So the idea of pruning that tree, the lower branches off as soon as you got enough height to be able to take off a branch or two at the bottom, a whorl or two of branches. And there's a term that we use, live crown ratio. Sort of a general rule of thumb is with any tree you never want to take more than 50%, and you probably don't even want to do that in one fell swoop. And I could show you some spruce trees. Well, there's some white pine along my driveway at home that I did that because the UPS truck was hitting the branches on the way in. Well, there's some epicormic sprouts that have, that the tree tells you if you've pruned too much, whether it's a deciduous or a conifer. So that's one of the first things that Ross does when the trees are about 3 feet high. Takes the bottom foot or so off. So you're taking off the most vulnerable, the branches that are the most likely for blister rust to take hold, because there's less air movement, higher humidity, and the temperature and humidity has to be just right for it to develop, and so that's one thing. The idea of flagging, everybody knows what flagging is on a tree, where you got one branch, all of a sudden it turns brown. Well, if it's a white pine, chances are that's blister rust, and you want to go over and investigate, and if there's enough distance between where the branch is dead and the main trunk, if you prune it off, well, probably at the main trunk, you have a pretty good chance of at least preventing that infection of blister rust from getting to the main trunk, because then it causes a canker and it will actually girdle the tree over time. But and somebody mentioned in one of the other groups as long as 20 years before that the tree can survive. I've got a few that it's like, well, that tree's been going for years, but it still has live needles below it. It's never going to amount to anything, but the tree is still alive. So, okay. Blister rust, flagging.
And as I mentioned to this group before, we have, and our trees are about 20 years old now. There's just blister rust all over, kind of in inaccessible places, etc. But we found that the mice love the blister rust cankers.
Oh.
And in the wintertime, they feed on those.
They don't climb the tree to feed on
Yeah,
them, do they? Oh,
yeah.
Hey.
And they will basically eat a canker and kill the canker.
No kidding.
Yeah.
Oh.
And I see that all over my white pine.
Okay. Wow. Yeah.
And that's been a real help, because that saves the tree.
Yeah. There you go. Well, especially if that flagging branch is
up there,
way up near the top. Unless you got a bucket truck,
mm-hmm.
Mother Nature's going to decide what happens up there.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. We talked about markets. We talked about the pests that can cause white pine troubles. Yeah, I don't know. Anybody have questions? Some observations? That's a good one, Gary. I hadn't heard that. I think of
It was real surprising. But
I think
yeah.
of mice and voles in trees as being negative, especially if you got hardwoods there.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But
There must be, I don't know what it is, maybe they're sweet or something, I don't know.
it maybe is, yeah.
But they're really attracted to them, yeah.
Because if you see that canker when at the right time, those spores are bright orange, or the fruiting structure on there where the spores come from is bright orange, I guess. And, yeah.
Ross mentioned a little bit about the pine he had planted in there as trainers for his oak.
Oh, that wasn't out here, was it? Okay. Yeah. Well, that's conservation reserve. That was one of my well, it wasn't my idea, but I recommended that to a lot of landowners. That the rules said, the rules called it a hardwood planting, but to get hardwoods established on heavy silt loam soils, it's a little tricky, especially with the competition of the grass, the meadow voles girdling those young oak trees in the wintertime. So that's where the idea of mowing between the rows to make it so the mice would have to cross open country to get to the next tree.